We are. An error occurred on Twitter. Are we live? Okay, so it might not be live on Twitter, but hello, let me know if you guys are seeing us, because it says that we are live. I see 0 viewers, so 1 second. Let's just make sure this thing is working before we get into it, because I know that I have talked about this discussion a lot, and a lot of people are looking forward to hearing from us today.
Can you paste the link to your tweet? Or I guess I can just go find it. I'm going to tweet this so my followers will know about it too.
Okay. Yes. Tweet the link to the live.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so everyone go share the live link because we want people to be watching. All right, so let me just share that real quickly. Let's see. And man, I can't believe it's already Thursday. Wow. Time flies. All right, let me just share this really quickly. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm not sure where you're watching from, but we have join Dr. Phil, our science Dr. Phil, as we talk about Starship, because I know that I'm curious about some more results. Okay, tweet. All right. You good on your end?
Yeah, I'm looking for the tweet. It hasn't popped up on my feed yet. Give me a second. I mean, we can get started. I can talk while I'm doing this.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back on the show so soon. I was kind of blown away how many people absolutely loved our discussion, having you as a special guest, and you just make a great guest. So thank you for being willing to come back on so quickly.
That was my pleasure. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. So of course, glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you've been tweeting recently, and we kind of talked about this before, but you had some folks collect samples of the debris from the Starship launch, including the fondag, including that dust. And so you have some more results, or at least partial results, that I wanted to get into, because they were quite interesting to me.
We do have results. We're still working on it, so they're preliminary. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. We received a number of samples. In fact, I've got one of them right here.
Oh, yeah, show us.
This one is from Ken in Arizona. So he sent a couple of little fragments of concrete that came off the beach next to
Which looks like
Starship.
mine. Yep.
Yeah. So these ones are not fondag. These ones are the concrete that I'm assuming was under the fondag.
Right.
Because from the image, it looks like the crater went all the way down to the dirt. So we do have one sample of fondag, though, as well. And we also have a chunk of limestone. So one of these chunks was actually just limestone, the mineral. Now, I don't know if limestone is common in that part of Texas, but probably it's not common to have big chunks on the beach like that. So I think the limestone probably came out of the launch pad as well. And limestone is often used as a base material, like under a road. So it may be that they had sand and then they put limestone and then they did concrete and then they did fondag. So we've got samples of the fondag, the concrete, and the limestone. And we looked at the spectra of those materials using visible and near infrared. And you can see the peaks and the dips in the spectrum. And we compared that to the sand samples that fell on Port Isabel, 5 to 6 miles away. And it turns out that they are completely unrelated materials. The stuff that fell on Port Isabel is not shredded fondag. It's not shredded concrete. It's not even limestone. So, but now the limestone had some sand attached to it. So we brushed off some of that sand off the limestone, and that matches what fell in Port Isabel. So we think that what fell on Port Isabel is the sand that was underneath everything, underneath the fondag, the concrete, the limestone, and then the sand.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so yeah. Anyways, the images of the crater shows it dug a really big, deep crater, and it was that material that was underneath all of it that got blown high enough in the sky so that it could travel far enough downrange and land there. I still haven't done the ballistics analysis. What we're really trying to get to is the ballistics. We want to understand how fast did that rocket exhaust accelerate the sand,
Right.
because normally you wouldn't expect rocket exhaust to make it go fast enough to go 6 miles in Earth's atmosphere. Normally, if it got up to the speed, even all the way up to the full speed of the rocket exhaust, it's only going to go a couple of kilometers at the most, because the atmospheric drag will stop it. Particles that are that small can't go that far. Well, let me make a correction. Particles that are as small as like 10 microns, like a tiny fraction of a human hair, we did find some of those size particles in the Port Isabel sand as well. Those can go long distances, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. And so we have dust from the Sahara blowing across. But they can stay up in the air so long because they get suspended in the air. And so they can go infinite distance. But it's those sand-sized particles that are like 200 microns, 500 microns, like coarse sand. Those should not go 5 or 6 miles. So, so that's what we're really trying to figure out. How fast did they have to go to travel that far? And if there's no feasible way that a rocket exhaust exploding a launch pad could create that much velocity, then we have to conclude there was a major upward convection associated with this event, which
Right.
lifted them higher. You know, it added atmospheric or drag in the direction downrange to help carry it that far. So that's where we are so far. We're going to send the samples to a researcher in Houston at Rice University, and he's going to do Raman spectroscopy, which is more diagnostic of the minerals. So he'll be able to tell exactly what minerals are in this sand, and we can
Right.
compare it to Boca Chica Beach. But anyways, after he does the Raman spectroscopy, we're going to write a paper. I've got a lot of photographs and field accounts from the different people that sent the samples. So they're all going to be co-authors in the paper. We're going to try to get it published in a journal describing this event.
Do you mind if I make a Twitter space as well, so that I know that some people might want to ask questions, not just in the comments, and this isn't live on Twitter. So why don't is that okay with you if I just get
Oh yeah,
the
sure.
Twitter going? Because I'm sure that some people will want to ask a question. So I'll do Starship chat with, sorry guys, we it's a lot to coordinate doing all these different platforms, but I think that one of the unique things about the Twitter spaces is that we can hear from people directly. So if you guys want to ask a question to Dr. Metzger yourself, then join the space. So let me start now. Okay, and we're going, I believe. So yeah, and thank you, by the way, Rhino, for the super sticker. Appreciate you guys watching and making time for this. I don't know if you are a subscriber to Elon on Twitter, Dr. Metzger. Are you?
Oh yeah.
You do? Okay, so
Mhm.
we know that there is a Starship update coming this evening. Uh, what is it that you are hoping to hear during that update?
Um, what am I hoping to hear? I
Yes.
guess just this. What's the schedule for getting it to the moon? That's the big uncertainty in my mind. The sooner the better. But I'm just curious to know how that's progressing, and how quickly we're going to get humans back on the moon.
Right. Man, this is just not working on Twitter, which is really frustrating. Gosh dang it. I am curious, have you tested the Fondag yet?
Um, yes, we've looked at the fondag just using visible and infrared. I mean, yeah, near infrared spectroscopy. it's not diagnostic for the content. We're not trying to back engineer the fondag. We just wanted to compare it to the sand to see if it was the same material. We can also see the particle sizes in the sand, and we can see the grain sizes in the fondag. And we did scrape off a little bit of the fondag to disaggregate it. And the particle sizes in the fondag are also much coarser than the particles of the sand and dust that fell on Port Isabel. So yeah, we've done some testing of it. By the way, Elliot, I'd like to mention that size analysis because we got some pretty interesting results there.
Okay.
So first of all, we noticed that we didn't just measure the sizes of the sand grains, but we measured their shapes. And we found out that there's two clusters. If you plot the elongation of the sand versus the diameter of the sand grain and put a dot where each sand grain is on that plot, they fall into two clusters, which I thought was pretty interesting because normally geology will not create very distinct populations like that unless there's a specific reason. But that was just an interesting gee whiz thing. The other point that was has more importance was the fact that most of the sand grains are actually about 200 microns in size, which means that they are way above the size level that would be a breathing hazard. There was a little bit that was like down around 10 microns, but it was so little that there was no breathing hazard. So if anybody wants to know, did Starship cause any potential risk to the surrounding communities, the answer is no, not from the breathing hazard of the dust.
Okay. Well, the Twitter space is not working, so sorry guys. I I cannot get it to work. But we do have and that is good to know. Although I feel like there are still some people that would argue against that. Have you still seen a lot of pushback from environmental agencies, or just
Well, I've seen it on the news on Twitter. Yeah, there are people who are concerned about the effects to wildlife in the close vicinity of the launch pad. And yeah, that's a problem. I mean, that's the nature of firing gigantic rockets. But if you want to go to space, if there's any value to space, then you have to do that somewhere. Somewhere in the world, you have to have some designated launch sites. And at the Kennedy Space Center, every time they launch, then there's wildlife that gets killed by the launch. It's sad. It's unfortunate. We want to try to minimize it, but there's a net benefit to humanity, to the environment, to our globe by doing space activities. And so I think that's just a necessary part of it.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you for the super chat. And Michael says, Ellie, the underlying sand below the OLM could be storm surge runoff from several prior hurricanes in the RGV. What do you think about that?
I don't know what OLM and RGV stand for.
Orbital Launch Mount and Rio Grande Valley.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. I mean, I'm assuming that what got excavated was what was underneath the concrete. So it must have been there before they built the concrete on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. But somebody else told me that the launch pad is built on an old riverbed. And then long ago, when they dug the port, it changed the flow of the water. And so that riverbed dried up. Mm-hmm. So the sand that's underneath there could be the water that washed downriver, like it says here, the storm surge runoff. So that is true. Yeah, when we have this geologist at Rice University do the Raman spectroscopy, he might be able to identify the exact minerals.
Every time you say ramen spectroscopy, I think of ramen, the soup.
I actually do too.
Yeah, I think some people commented that actually. They're like, is this guy talking about soup? And Alan, thank you for the super chat. Do you want to give us just a little 101 on the soup spectroscopy if those are unfamiliar?
Well, it's been a long time since I was in grad school, but it's a spectroscopic method that probes the crystal structure of the material. So it's a crystallography method. And so when I was in grad school, I used to make jokes about ramen. You buy those ramen packets, they're little rectangles. I used to say that is a ramen crystal. And so ramen crystallography is making soup. But so yeah, that's an old standby joke that we have in that field of physics. But
Well, let
I
me
don't really know the details about how it works anymore. It's been too long.
Okay, so let's see. I feel like we started to have some questions. Um Wicked One Show says, I don't believe Starship or Blue Origin are really a first choice for a moon lander, but Dynetics Alpaca. What is your take on it?
Um, well, I've actually done some work for 2 out of these 3 companies on their lunar landers, and I had to sign non-disclosure agreements. And so this is getting too closely, too dangerously close to those non-disclosure agreements. So
Fair.
I probably
That's
can't
fair.
really answer. I mean, if you want to ask me generic physics questions about landers without framing it as a specific company, just what do you
Yes.
think about the physics of this feature?
Okay.
I could answer that.
Well, we do have a question from Steve for you as a planetary scientist. A little bit off topic, but could you ask Dr. Metzger if he has any opinion on the phosphorus apparently detected in the water gushing out of,
Ah,
how do you pronounce that?
Enceladus.
Enceladus. There you go.
Yep, it's a moon in the outer solar system, and it's an ice-covered moon, and it has vents that are blowing volatiles up off the surface, and so scientists have been looking at these vents, looking at the volatiles blowing out, doing molecular spectroscopy by looking at how the light. I don't know exactly how they did it, but one of the common methods is you wait until a bright star passes behind that spray of volatiles, and it happens pretty frequently. Not every day, but there's enough stars in the sky that it happens regularly. And so when the star goes behind it, you look at the light of the star, and you'll notice certain wavelengths start getting filtered out.
Hmm.
And when those wavelengths get filtered out, that tells you what are the molecules in that venting vapor. And so they analyzed it and they saw, yeah, there is phosphorus. And that's really interesting because phosphorus is considered one of the potential signatures to look for a life-supporting planet. So we can do this kind of spectroscopy now, even on exoplanets that are going around other stars. Sometimes the techniques are getting better and better, and so we can start to see the spectra of light coming from the atmospheres around these little exoplanets far away. And so you could look for phosphorus, you can look for oxygen, various things to try to determine if it's a planet that could support life. But see, this time Enceladus is an icy moon in our own solar system, and it doesn't have an appreciable atmosphere. You wouldn't expect there to be any life on the surface, but it does have these oceans that are under the ice. And so people have speculated that if you've got liquid water, that means you've got energy, and you've got water, and if you've got organic material, and now we know phosphorus too, then those are some of the ingredients for life. So it's at least possible that there could be life living under the ice. In fact, Alan Stern, he was the head of the Pluto mission. Well, it's still ongoing. He still is the head of it. He used to be the head of science, the science mission director at NASA, and he's the guy that hired me into my current job. He one time held a position at UCF as well. Alan recently made an argument that maybe the majority of life in the cosmos is actually underground in these icy bodies. And if there were advanced civilizations living under the sheet of ice, how would that, and let's say they were intelligent, and so they were civilizations living underwater, buried beneath kilometers of ice so they could never see the stars. He asked the question, how would that affect their psyche? Would they ever get the idea, let's fly to the top of the water and try to dig through the barrier to see what's on the other side? if they ever had that idea, then they might get out and explore the cosmos and contact us. But he said they might never get the idea to do that. And that ice not only does it make it habitable on that small icy moon, but it also becomes a barrier to keep them from knowing that we're out here and from communicating with us. So Alan suggested maybe this helps us to understand the Fermi paradox, why we're not hearing any communication from any other civilizations out there in space. So Enceladus is one of these bodies that could fit into that scenario that Alan was talking about.
Yeah, what is your take on the Fermi paradox as a planetary scientist?
Okay, well,
Oh man, loaded question, right?
I'll just keep it short, but yeah, I'm of the mind that we shouldn't be speculating when there's no data. And I hear people make this argument like anytime you have energy, water, organic material, 100% of the time life is going to appear. And I don't think we have enough data to make that argument. I've seen a few published papers arguing that life is not that likely to happen, even if you had a good planet. So I feel like the data is still insufficient to answer the question about how common life would be in the cosmos. There was one paper that I read recently. The name of the author is suddenly slipping my mind. I follow the guy on Twitter. He's really interesting. He's Danish. He's at Oxford University, though. I wish I could remember his name. Anyways, he wrote a paper where he argued that if there's a great filter in the past, which prevents life from becoming too advanced, what if there were 2 or 3 events, then the probability distribution of life occurring on a planet would have a certain form. You would expect it to happen in a certain amount of time. And so he compared those events in our past history, like the Cambrian explosion and the extinction of the dinosaurs. There were a few other events like that, like 3 or 4. And he looked at the history of our Earth, and he said, you can actually tell if it's more likely that life is common or not based on the timing of our planet. And so he argued that the evidence, it's about 90% sure that life is not that common because you have to pass through these events. But there's still a 10% chance that it could be common. So that's the best quantitative paper that I've seen. Now, even with that, though, the cosmos is big. And so the question is, even if it's not all that common, could it still happen close enough in our galaxy that we should be able to detect and talk to these other beings that are out there? So he was thinking like, well, maybe 10% chance. But he admitted, even his paper, the data was pretty sketchy. We just don't know yet. So I don't know. It's a big universe. By the way, I'll just mention one other thing about this. There was a really interesting paper by, I think his name was Stuart Anderson. He's at Oxford. And he wrote a paper about what if you created self-replicating robots that use resources in space to build other robots. Now, I've published a couple papers about this, so I've studied this topic. And so when I saw him give a talk on it, it was really interesting to me. But he said, what if a civilization got the idea, let's build this at Mercury, the equivalent of Mercury in their star system. And let's take Mercury completely apart, use the entire planet to build a gigantic railgun and build spaceships. And then we shoot them in the railgun and we aim at every galaxy in the sky. He argued that there's enough material in Mercury, planet Mercury, to send a spore ship to every single galaxy in the visible universe. And it would take a few billion years for them to get to all these galaxies. And then they could set up their own self-replicating robots in each galaxy and send out spore ships to every star in every galaxy. And he said his argument was, if only one civilization in the whole visible universe decided to do that, then they would be here by now. And so where are they? And so he said it deepens the Fermi paradox. It makes it even more of a paradox, because if even just one civilization decided to do it, then they should be here by now. So I thought that was really a fascinating question. I would say that there's two most likely answers to the Fermi paradox. One is that life is just not that likely, in which case, like Elon and Jeff and others are saying, it's really important for us to make sure that the light of consciousness does not go extinct in the cosmos, because we may be very rare and precious throughout the visible universe. The other possible answer to the Fermi paradox is that maybe within a couple hundred years of where we are right now, you develop super intelligent computers. Technology takes off so quickly that you have this singularity type event. And when that happens, your civilization becomes so advanced that you become basically invisible to everybody else. You have no need for radio waves. You have no need for all these kind of starships that are easily detectable. And so that's the scenario where you end up going transcendent. And so I think either transcendence or rarity of life are the two most likely answers, in my opinion.
Okay, so you've thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, UFOs have been in the news a lot recently. Kurt even says, well, according to the whistleblower, they're already here. So have you been following the recent headlines about
I
UFOs?
have. I'm skeptical, to be honest. I mean, I'm not against the idea that there could be aliens watching us, because it makes total sense. I think if we were 100 years more advanced than we are right now, we would have enough technology that we would be watching every other life supporting planet within 100 light years. Um, and so if anybody is 1,000 years ahead of us, or 1,000,000 years, or 10 or 50 or 100 million years ahead of us, the cosmos is old, so if anybody got here before we did, they're probably watching us. I mean, why
Yeah.
wouldn't they be watching us? They should be. So it makes total sense that if there's anybody out there, they're probably watching us. But the evidence I've seen so far from UFOs don't convince me that that is it.
Hmm.
I mean, my wife and I actually saw some unidentified aerial phenomena. One time we were out looking at a meteor shower, and we saw a line of four, like a brownish orange colored lights in a row fly across the sky. And it was freaky. It was kind of
Where?
scary, to be honest.
Where?
In Orlando, they were going from north to south. Could have been a polar orbit, could have been spacecraft in polar orbit. But I did the calculations. I estimated their angular velocity, their spacing, their diameter, and their speed. Well, I said angular velocity. And the one unknown is how high are they. But when I plugged in how high they are, there were only two values that made sense. Either they were 50 feet high and they were ducks that were glowing orange, which, we rolled that out. The other number that made sense is they were 65,000 feet, I think, going Mach 6, which meant they could have been some super fast aircraft. Maybe they were something in low Earth orbit that dipped down, temporarily. The burnt orange color, that is the right color for plasma glow, going
Okay.
very fast at those high altitudes. So, so I don't know.
So it
You know,
freaked you.
yeah. I mean, we both were like, "Let's get inside the house. They're looking at us." I mean, it was like the hair on the back of your neck crawling and stuff. And so I can see why it would make you freak out to see something like that. We freaked out, but
Can, can you
but
imagine the pandemonium if this was like all over the news and actually confirmed and obvious? Like, people would freak out. I don't think we could handle it, honestly.
Yeah. I have a friend, he's a theologian in Germany. He's a Lutheran theologian. And I asked him about this once, and and he said, "Well, you know, it'll take religion 5 minutes to resolve to incorporate it into their beliefs." So he didn't he didn't think it would be really that revolutionary. Um, okay, whatever. I'm sure he's thought about it a lot more than I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, speaking of Twitter, I did want to talk about what I saw you tweeting about the other day. So let me share the screen. And you guys, I'm a little worried about Elon's Twitter space later because I've tried to create a Twitter space 4 times now, including restarting my phone, and it is not working on my end.
Hmm.
So uh don't know what's going on with Twitter, but whatever. We're going to move on from that because I saw this that you had commented. This has over 1 million views, so it got a lot of attention. News: Mars declared unsafe for humans. No one can survive for longer than 4 years, according to this physicsastronomy.com study. And so you and there's already a community notes on it. It looks like the headline misrepresents the paper it cited, which says no such thing about surviving on Mars, but still it got a lot of attention. So I want to talk about your take on this article.
Yeah. So first of all, I disagree with the community note. The paper actually does talk about whether you can survive on Mars, but it was not clear in the way it said things. And so it kept talking about you can only fly, you can only have a 4 year flight.
Hmm.
And then it talked about the Mars reference mission that NASA did. I was a part of that study at NASA, the Design Reference Mission 5.0. And they referenced that. They said this is an example of a 1,000-day mission. And so, but that 1,000-day mission is like 6 months in flight, a year and a half or 2 years or something on the surface, and then 6 months flying back. And so it includes the time on Mars. And the paper consistently was including the time on Mars in their study. So when they said flight, it confuses people to make you think that they're only talking about going to and from Mars. But you know, that really doesn't make sense because it doesn't take 4 years to go to and from Mars. So it really does include the time on the surface. And the paper is making the claim that you cannot have longer than 4 years, including your time on the surface of Mars, before the radiation dose is so bad that you can't do it. And
Hmm.
that claim is just plain wrong. There's several reasons that why it's wrong. And so if I had peer reviewed the paper, I would have said, no, do not publish this until they make these corrections.
So what do you think about an article like that getting over 1 million views?
Well, it happens all the time, you know, all the time you see these papers published that have some mistake, they have some flaw, and then there's some news article about it, and then the news article maybe even exaggerates it more, and then it gets millions of views and goes viral. Happens all the time. So what can you do? You just keep trying to push the corrections, push the good science,
Right.
and eventually we're going to get there. Do you want to know what I think was wrong with that study? Why it?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, if you're on, okay, first of all, they had this plot that showed that the thicker your spacecraft wall, the less dose you get of radiation by the crew. That kind of makes sense. But if the wall gets more than a certain thickness, the dose starts actually going up. You start getting more radiation dose. And so they stopped the curve right there and they said, see, there's a minimum in the curve and you can't do any better than that. And so if that's the amount of dose you're going to get, that amount of dose times 4 years uses up your entire lifetime dose of radiation. Well, the problem is if that was true, if that curve kept going up to infinity, that would mean if you had an infinitely thick shield, you would get infinite radiation. And that makes no sense at all. You know, you don't get infinite radiation by making your field thicker and thicker. The
No.
reality is that curve reaches a maximum and then goes back down again. And so the whole question is, where is that maximum and how low can you make it? And then how much mass do you need on your spacecraft to get down to those low amounts of dose? And the second problem with the paper is they only considered aluminum. And everybody knows that aluminum is a very bad material for shielding because it creates secondary radiation. The galactic cosmic rays are typically iron particles. They were created in the supernovas of stars far away in our galaxy. And these iron particles have been flying around like in a pinball machine, whipping around star after star. And every time they go through another shock wave from an exploded supernova, they get accelerated even more. And so the distribution of energies it's got this long exponential tail that goes forever. Such high energies that it's really hard, almost impossible to shield against them. And so as these particles fly through a heavy metal like aluminum or even lead, what they'll do is they'll hit the nuclei of that metal and they'll shatter the nuclei. And so now instead of having one radiation particle, you might have 3 or 4. And they're all going a little bit slower because they had to share the energy. Right. And when they're going slower, they actually have a higher chance of being absorbed in your body. And so using metal for your shield does actually increase the radiation rather than reduce it because of the secondary radiation.
Huh.
And so, yeah. And so, so the answer is don't use metal. You want to use something that has a lot of hydrogen in it because hydrogen is a single proton and it can't shatter. And so you want to make your radiation shield out of things like water. You know, the oxygen can shatter. Yeah, the oxygen can shatter. But when an oxygen atom shatters, all those secondaries are going to be hitting lots of hydrogen. You know, so there's a lot of hydrogen in there. And so also polyethylene, any sort of a polymer that has a lot of hydrogen in it makes a really good radiation shield. So, so what you want to do is you want to put your water for your space trip around the place where the crew lives. And you want to put your food pantry adjacent to where the crew is going to be sleeping. And you want to spend as much time as possible surrounded by all that hydrogen. And so there's things like that you would do to reduce the dose way down. Another thing you can do is just make the travel time to and from Mars faster. If you can get a faster travel time by refueling so that you can thrust longer, then you reduce the dose. And once you land on Mars, remember those 1,000-day missions, those 4-year periods, includes the time on the surface, which is the majority of the time. When you're on the surface, you simply pile dirt over your habitat and you can make it 2 meters, 3 meters thick, whatever you need. And so, you know, this is not new. We've known this for decades. And I've taken part in architecture studies within NASA, outside of NASA, and always, 100% of the time, you include a bulldozer to push dirt over the habitat to build a radiation shield. So, you know, this is long established, normal practice. And so this thing about you can only live 4 years on Mars, completely wrong. I don't know how it got published.
Well, that's, I think a lot of things we don't know how they get published and get attention, but I'm glad that, you know, you can set the record straight. And Dan is keeping up with you because he says, yes, how about water as radiation shielding? And we have some more questions that I did star. So Ross wants to know, what scientific research has been done on the effects of long-term spaceflight on astronauts' mental health? So
I'm sorry, I accidentally bumped my microphone. It came unplugged. Could you repeat that question?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Ross wants to know, you know, we're talking about the physical effects, but also what scientific research has been done. And I feel like this is a hard one to do on the effects of long-term spaceflight on astronauts' mental health.
Oh, that's a
right?
really good question. There have been some studies on it, and there have been some field studies, so to speak, where they put people into a school bus for a year or something, for months. And there have been a lot of field tests up on Mauna Loa in Hawaii, run by High Seas, where they have volunteer crew members live for months, up to a year or more. I know one of these volunteer astronauts, Annie Meyer. She worked with me at NASA at the Swamp Works,
Oh,
and
cool.
she was a volunteer crew member at High Seas. She even took I developed a soil testing device for use by astronauts inside spacesuits, and she took it to High Seas and used it in her testing. So there have been a lot of these tests, and they do assess the mental health issues. Um, and also, we have astronauts in low Earth orbit that stay up there for over a year. So we do have some data.
Mhm.
Um, it's not really my field of research, so I don't know what the critical questions are. But I know that we've got a lot of smart people in NASA and academia and at the various space companies who are paying attention to this. So I'm going to guess they've got a pretty good idea what it takes to do a Mars mission for like a sortie mission where you can go spend a couple years and come back. For longer term habitation, where you're cooped up in a habitat on Mars, trying to bootstrap a colony. I'm going to guess that the type of people who will sign up for that are going to be dedicated, hardcore people, and they're going to know what they're getting into. Um, um, Now, I've been watching For All Mankind on Apple TV. I love that
Still haven't
series.
seen that. I've heard it's so good. Is it?
Yeah, I really love it. There's a lot of stuff in there that I mean, as we're watching it, I keep telling my wife, like, hey, that's real. That's right. That's what it would really do. And oh, wow, look at what they did with the regolith. That was actually amazing how they did that. So it's pretty cool. Because I used to be on the launch team on the space shuttle and supported missions, and I helped build the space station. And so I've got some of that flight ops experience for human space flight program. So it's really a well done series. So I don't want to give any spoilers, but they do talk a little bit about this factor,
Mhm.
about the mental health of astronauts who are cooped up in a habitat for a long time.
I'm sure you've seen The Martian, correct?
Oh yeah,
I felt like he actually seemed pretty composed for the situation he was in. I feel like they um, I don't know, underestimated how crazy that situation would have been. Do you agree that he seemed a little bit too put together by the end of all those years?
I don't know. I mean, it could be.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it was a hero story, right? And he was the
Yeah.
hero, so heroes are better than most of us, right?
I guess,
That's why
but
we admire them, So I guess it
yeah.
had to be like that. But the main thing I noticed on The Martian, I read the book before I watched the movie because at NASA, I was at NASA at the time, and I was working in the space resources group at NASA. And everybody's like, hey, have you read The Martian? Hey, have you heard of this book, The Martian? It's super cool. It talks about our stuff and it's really good. And so I read it, and yeah, it was really cool. I mean, even as a NASA guy who prided myself on being innovative, there were times where he wrote the character into a dead end. And I'm like, okay, he's going to die. There's no way out of this. And then these are things that didn't make it in the movie. They were in the book, but not in the movie. And then he would do some freaky thing like, oh my goodness, did he really think of that? And oh my goodness, that would actually work, and blew my mind over and over again as I read the book. So I loved it. The movie was more eye candy, it didn't have all of the technical problem solving that the book had, but I loved the movie too. They were different. They were both really good, in my opinion.
I'm hearing some sort of noises of construction or something. So sorry, I might mute myself from time to time. Daniel asked a while ago, and this kind of goes back to Starship, and I want to see what time Elon's planning that space. Sometimes this evening, but is there anything that you've run across for a launch pad that nobody has tried yet?
Yeah. There was an idea that I had a few years ago. Um, when I was at NASA, I had this idea. When the Phoenix lander landed on Mars, we were all like, okay, we're finally going to see a big crater form. And it didn't make a big crater. What it did was it blew away about 2 or 3 centimeters of soil. And underneath that soil, there was ice. And the ice acted like a landing pad. It prevented deep cratering. And then the light bulb went on, and I thought, oh my goodness, you could build landing pads out of ice. And it sounds crazy because you're landing a rocket with fire on the ice. But the ice doesn't have to survive forever. It just has to survive for you to land on it. And so I got this idea, okay, Mars has a lot of water. Let's go harvest the water, put it in a big vat, and get it really cold so it's a slurry of solid and liquid all mixed together, and then spread it on the ground. And in the Martian very low dense atmosphere, most of that ice, or about half of it, is going to flash evaporate to vapor, but it'll leave about half of it as solid frozen ice on the ground. And then use a steamroller like a Zamboni to go smooth out your ice rink. And then you've got a landing pad made out of ice. And then what you do is you push dirt over it, a few centimeters, to create a vapor barrier and some shade from the sun. And that's all you need, just a few centimeters of soil pushed on top. So because you only need it to survive about a half a year until the crew shows up. So you finish building the landing pad, you say, okay, it's done. We successfully built it. You're go for launch back at Starship base, and they lift off, they go, and they can land on the ice landing pad, blow the dirt off. And then after they land over the next year, it's all going to sublimate away and it's going to go away, but it's okay. It served its purpose. So I think that's doable. I think it's doable on the moon as well. You could build landing pads out of water. I think you're muted.
Hey, thanks for reminding me. I've had my floors have been leaking here for like 2 weeks, and the problem is not fixed. So that's what's going on in the background there. But are you optimistic about the implementation of the water-cooled steel plate on this next flight of Starship?
Yeah, absolutely. It ought to work. I'm sure they've done all the engineering. It's just a question of will the water flow be fast enough to carry the heat away so that the steel doesn't melt? And back at NASA, I was part of a program called Morpheus. I was on the ground crew, so I helped design and build the landing zone, where it was a simulated moonscape, and we used steel launch and landing pads because we wanted them to be portable. We wanted to be able to keep moving it around so they can take off from different locations. And so I personally did the analysis to find out, would the steel melt when this Morpheus took off? And it turns out that we were using steel that was about that thick. It was the kind of steel that they use in highway construction. When there's a big hole in the road, they'll go put a big piece of steel, a big steel plate. So we literally just bought some of those. And the analysis showed that the heat will spread through the steel fast enough so you will not get a local hot spot that will melt. And also, the entire steel will not get up to the melting point. It can take the entire heat of the launch and not melt. Now, that was for a small vehicle the size of the Morpheus lander. And, we were NASA, and so we were conservative. They say that at NASA, the engineers wear both belts and suspenders. And so what we did was we put ablative material on top of the steel. It's basically like that white silicone that you see painted on rooftops sometimes. And now what an ablative does, ablatives cannot catch fire, because when you put a flame on it to break the molecules will break down, but it actually uses up energy instead of giving out energy. And so it absorbs the energy and it keeps things cool. So we used an ablative material, and it was no problem. We used it for flight tests with Morpheus. Now, when I heard for the first time that SpaceX is going to use water-cooled steel, that was like one of the, like I was describing my, ooh, that's so cool with the Martian. It was one of those feelings for me. It was like, ooh, water-cooled. They're going to have channels in the steel, taking the heat out in real time. That is so cool. Um, so yeah, there's no reason why it can't work. You just have to do the
Yeah.
engineering, and there's a lot of really smart people at SpaceX. So I trust
Yeah.
that they've done that.
Well, and you do some work with SpaceX, correct? Is this analysis that you're doing, for example, of the ejecta, is that for SpaceX or outside of SpaceX?
Well, I have done some work with them, and it's all under non-disclosure agreement. The one thing I can tell you that's public knowledge is that they had a contract with NASA. NASA announced the contract, and the name of the contract was studying plume effects to land large vehicles on the moon. And the University of Central Florida got a subcontract on that same project. So that's public knowledge. So it's safe to say that they have worked with NASA on this topic area.
So are you going to be listening to the Twitter space tonight? Hopefully it works on Elon's end, but about the Starship update.
Yeah, I will definitely listen to that. Well, unless something pulls me away, but I'm planning to watch it.
If you could ask Elon a question, do you have one already that you are hoping to ask or would like to have asked about Starship?
Yeah, I think a cool question would be how much of the lunar Starship is going to apply to the Mars Starship? So, how far is this human landing system for NASA taking you down the road towards actual humans on Mars? I'm hoping there's a lot of overlap so that we can get people to Mars sooner. But I think that'd be a cool question to ask.
Are you okay if I get the chance? Are you okay if I ask that?
Yeah, I won't ask any questions, so please do
Oh,
if
all
you
right. Well,
want
great.
to.
Great. Ross says, great question. And Glenn wants to know what time is the Elon Twitter space. He said sometime this evening. So it's one of those, knowing him, he'll probably do it while he's eating dinner. It'll probably be like 6 or 7, but I will for sure be covering it. And another super chat from Al. Thank you. Al says, excellent show today, Ellie and Dr. Phil. Thank you very much. This is the type of information that drives public acceptance of spaceflight. Definitely. And people like your question, so let's cross our fingers that I get to ask that. Let's see, there was another question here. So Michael wants to know, ask Dr. Metzger if he's heard of any NASA or private company testing cryosleep for long duration space travel to Mars to conserve resources.
I have not heard of any studies about that. I'm just going to speculate. Okay, I think that it's, of course it's a staple in science fiction, but the problem with freezing is that water expands when it freezes, and so there's a concern that what if it disrupts things in your body? When things freeze, the water crystallizes. Is it going to go back to usable again? Generally, if you freeze an animal, like freeze an insect and then unfreeze it, it's dead. So I don't know if cryofreeze is a real thing that you could do. Maybe there's other ways that you could put people into a deep sleep, not cryo, but just like hibernation, like bears do. Maybe that's possible. But actually, I'm not sure we're really going to need it for Mars travel, because yeah, it's a long time to get to Mars. It's like 6 months, but we had people living in the space station for a year.
Right.
I know people who've lived, like Nicole Stott. She lives in Tampa nearby, and she was in space station for a very long time. So it's doable. I just figure you're going to bring a guitar, you're going to bring video games, and you've got the internet.
Have you seen Passengers?
Yeah. I did.
Okay,
That was
yeah.
it was a fun movie.
Also, I really like that movie.
Yeah.
What an interesting kind of ethical dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Would you have woken someone up?
I hope I would not have, but who knows unless you're in that circumstance, right?
Yeah, seriously. Well, and I feel like that's the issue with the, the mental health testing. It's like there's really no replication for just actually doing it. So it's hard to do any sort of, I don't know, mock testing aside from the real thing, I feel like, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if it's mock testing, then you know it's mock testing. But if it's the real thing, I think that's going to change your attitude about it. You know,
When you
if you know that you're on the first mission of humans to
Yeah,
Mars, I think that might help you hold it
and
together a little bit.
Earth starts fading and fading and fading, and then you don't see it anymore, like, that's gotta be terrifying. Very
Yeah.
ungrounding.
Yeah.
Very
I would
ungrounding.
honestly, I would not do it. I have a bit of a fear of heights. And
Oh,
I think what you just describing that reminded me, my wife and I went parasailing at Daytona, and my wife talked them into sending us all the way up, even though we only paid to go up to the second level. And
oh,
all the way up is 4/10 of a mile. And it was so scary.
really?
I mean, the hotels look like little Monopoly hotels down there. The beach airplanes with the banners were flying way below us, and you couldn't even see people on the boat that was pulling us. There was no way we could have got help if we needed help. And even thinking
Man.
about it now, I feel panicky. I mean,
Oh, geez.
when we started coming down again, I was like, "Thank you, thank you." It seemed like we were up there for 5 hours. Um, so yeah, seeing the Earth get smaller and smaller, I won't be on that mission. I'll
You'd
be
rather
doing some of the
study it.
analysis. That's right.
This is
I'll help
this
it
is
go.
Yeah, this is not for you. Oh gosh, so you just reminded me. I did want to make a little update, and you're a good person to talk to about this. About my zero G flight, it will officially be in October, October
Oh,
26th through 20.
congratulations!
Well, the flight's on the 27th, but Charlie Duke will be joining the flight,
Awesome. That is
so
so
that's
cool.
crazy. And you've been on how many zero G flights?
I don't know the
Uh,
number, but
Yeah,
I've done
that's
450 parabolas. You know, every mission would do,
wow.
every flight would do 40 or 50 parabolas. So here, I'll do a quick calculation. Let's see, average 45. So 450. Well, I can do it in my head. That's 10 flights, right? 45 times 10 is 450. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow, 10 flights. Okay, well, I'm just doing one. But and I think Nicole Stott, she was supposed to be on the originally scheduled one, so I'm not sure if she's still confirmed, but they have added Charlie Duke. It was supposed to be Nicole Stott and Doug Hurley, but now I guess Charlie Duke is also going to be on the
That's so
flight.
cool.
So yeah, it's just crazy. It's definitely, a few months away, so it's like something, I'm still like, is it going to happen? But like, what is your advice for first time zero G?
You know, even though I do have a little bit of fear of heights, I had no fear of that on the
That's
airplane.
good.
It was just such a rush. I would recommend at some point, take a break from everything else and go look out the window for one parabola, because
Okay.
it was freaky. Because the ocean is like, well, first of all, it's like I don't know. You know, you're climbing, and the sky is darker in the direction where you're climbing, and then you go over the top. You know, it's lunar gravity or zero gravity, even while you're still going up. And then you go over the top, and the ocean goes like this, and now you're diving towards the ocean. It's really pretty cool to see that. Um,
Oh gosh.
and then when they pull out, you know, when you're pulling out, it's 2G, and you're really feeling the 2G, and the ocean goes the other way, right?
What does
And
that
the
feel like?
the wing tips are bending up on the airplane as you're pulling 2Gs. But I just kept saying they had good aerospace engineers. This was well
Yeah.
designed. It can handle this. NASA was involved in certifying this. So, but it was really cool. The only thing I was afraid of was, what if I have to go to the bathroom during the
Oh,
mission? because they don't have a bathroom on the airplane. They have a bucket, and they have a curtain that they hold up in front of the bucket. So so I was afraid that, I mean, and they have to stop doing the parabolas, you know.
Yeah.
So
Don't be that guy.
everybody's sitting there waiting for you to finish and
Yeah.
come out. And I'm sure you get a slow clap when you're all done, you know. So that was what I was afraid of. So
Wow.
don't eat spicy foods the night before. Eat a
Oh God.
bland diet the night before, bland diet the morning of, you know, oatmeal. Um, and if
We're
they
keeping it
offer,
real.
and I always took the motion sickness drugs that they offered. They had a NASA
Yes.
flight surgeon, and I always said, I will take the maximum allowable dose.
Yeah, me too. Me
Yep.
too. Oh man, I didn't even think about the bathroom thing. Well, we'll see how it goes, but I am
But I
excited.
never, yeah, I never had to go to the bathroom. I never saw anybody ever have to go to the bathroom. So that was the one thing that I obsessed about every time.
Well, it's not well, at least the one that I'm going on, I don't think it's more than like 30 minutes.
Yeah, they
Right?
are not that long.
They're not that
Yeah.
long. Okay.
Where are
Okay.
you flying out of? Out of Ellington or out of the
Houston.
Cape? Yeah,
Houston.
Ellington
Yeah.
Field, south of Houston. Yeah, that's where I flew out of every time.
It,
So they
it
take
was
off. It takes you about an hour to get out over the Gulf, and then they have this range that they fly down and they turn around and fly back. And we did that multiple times, and then they fly back and land. And the whole thing, for me, they were done in like 2 hours. Wheels up at 9
okay.
a.m. You're back on the ground at 11.
Okay. There is a little bit of anticipation, anxiety, but that's all right. It's going to be great. It's going to be
Yeah.
great.
Also,
Um,
the drugs they give you, there's two drugs. One of
okay.
them is a motion sickness drug, which is a depressant. So they also give you an amphetamine to counteract the depressant.
Oh no.
And so you have a downer and an upper. And
Oh no.
my feeling is that they don't wear off at the same rate. And so you go through about a period of an hour or two where you feel a little bit drunk after the mission. And so they tell you don't drive a car to lunch. You know, get somebody else to ride you to lunch, or else just bring your lunch or something.
What are these medications? The downer and the upper.
I forgot the names of them, but they're one of them is the standard motion sickness drug, and the other one is some standard amphetamine, I guess.
Do you know if every person that you have flown with, did they also take the drugs or did anyone opt out?
Yeah, well, I saw one guy opt out one time, but even the NASA test director who flies all the time, she took the drugs too. Um, but there was this one guy on one flight. He flew with us a lot of these flights, and he had flown so many times. He said, "I'm not going to take the drugs this time." He got so sick, they had to strap
Seriously?
him down. Yeah, he got so
Oh,
sick, they strapped him down in the back of the plane and they gave him an injection of the drug
oh,
to try to keep him under control. And he told us later he just wanted the plane to crash. He wanted everybody to die rather than keep feeling that awful feeling.
stop.
Um, yeah, he
That's
wanted
not
to
okay
die.
to say.
He wanted himself to die and everybody on the plane to die rather than keep going through that
Wait,
feeling. Um,
what the
and
heck?
then
You're kidding.
I've heard the feeling of being motion sickness is not good. So take the
Okay.
drugs. Take the
Okay.
drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. People are saying that's horrible. Oh my gosh.
And then
That
the rest of the day, we got back to the reduced gravity office at Ellington Field, and we all have these little desks, lab benches where you can work on your experiment. He laid on his back on one of those lag benches with his eyes closed and didn't move for hours.
oh
And
my gosh.
and that night we were all going out to dinner, and he said he still felt bad. So yeah,
Dude,
but
what
I'll
the
tell you
heck?
this too. I've known people who got sick and they said, I am not going to be sick for this whole flight. And so they fought back, and they said they told the flight surgeon on board the airplane, I'm feeling better now. And so they unbuckled and they went back to their experiment, even though they weren't feeling that good. They just kind of lied about it.
Oh
And,
no.
you know, so they fought through it. And for me, every time I have done a flight campaign, you know, usually it's 4 days in a row of flying, or else 2 days in a row. For the first day of flying, I always start to feel a little bit sick around the 10th parabola. And I start to feel like, ooh, I just kind of feel bad right now. And then it's a mental game. I tell myself, no, I am not going to get sick. I'm going to be okay. And I put my head back into what I'm doing, and it works.
This
Then
is
the feeling goes
insane.
away. You know, so there is a little bit of a mental game about it. Just convince yourself you're not going to get sick.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and then it goes away, you know, it went away. I didn't feel that at all on the second, third, or fourth day.
Well, if you've done this 10 times, it can't be that bad.
Oh, it's fun. It's yeah. I mean, I've only seen somebody get sick that one time. The one guy who didn't take the drugs, and
Well,
I've
he got real, like, mentally sick. That's
yeah,
crazy.
and he would normally take drugs and normally have no problem.
Oh,
So
wow. Why
yeah,
did he
so
stop?
he just
He
wanted
just
to prove he was
see it.
tough and could do it.
Wow.
But you know, like I said, even the NASA flight directors who are on board the airplane, um,
They're taking
they
them.
they took it too.
All right, we're
Yeah,
taking the
so
drugs. We're taking the drugs. We're taking the
it,
drugs.
it
Oh
it
my
makes
god.
your mouth a little dry. They recommend have some candy in your flight suit, in your pockets, some hard candy to suck on. It
Wow.
makes you feel a little bit tipsy, like you're on 2 or 3 beers, you know, that you chugged. You know, a little bit. You feel a little bit that way during the mission.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
that's part
Well,
of
I
the
don't drink at
experience.
all. I haven't drank since I was 15. I don't drink alcohol. So, like, I just want to make sure this isn't like actual alcohol. It's like
No, no,
not.
no, no. This is approved by the NASA flight surgeon. You
Okay.
know, this is what they recommend. And you know, they would
Okay.
say, well, there's 3 doses, 1, 2, or 3, depending on your body weight. And based on my body weight, I needed a 3. And so I'd always
Wow.
say, give me a 3. I'm taking a 3. One flight, they ran out of 3s. You know, they were little pre-made
Yeah.
containers. And they would always tell you, definitely take the full dose, definitely. So I always did. Well, this one time they ran out of 3s, and they're like, oh, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. Just take a 2. I'm like, are you sure about that? And so I took a 2 and I was okay. So
Okay. Oh, that's good to hear. So, okay, before we like leave this zero G topic, what's fun about it? Explain how fun it is to feel weightless,
oh
please.
my goodness, you cannot describe it in words. It's like a roller coaster feeling. You know, when you're going down that big hill, you just feel it all throughout your whole body. It's not because your feet, you know, it's the weight of your feet on the ground. It's the weight of every cell in your body being pulled down against the cell under it, all of that disappearing. So you feel it throughout your entire body, and it's like, whoa, it's just amazing. Lunar gravity. So I've done 0, lunar, and Martian plus 2G during the turns and the pullouts. And
Right.
lunar gravity feels pretty much the same as 0 gravity, except that you do come slowly back to the ground. But in that feeling you have in your body, it's very close to the same thing. Mars gravity, I'll be honest, not going to lie, was a little disappointing because it felt kind of like Earth gravity. It wasn't enough less to give you that buoyant feeling that you have for lunar. So Mars gravity, it's like, okay, yeah, it's kind of cool. You know, you can tell it's a little bit different than Earth, but it's not that much different. You know, it is 3/8 of Earth's gravity, so it actually is a lot different in math, but in
Mhm.
the feeling, it seemed a lot more like Earth than the moon in the way it
Really?
felt. Yeah.
Okay.
But lunar gravity and 0 gravity were both like, oh, this is so cool. You know, we fly around, you can push off the walls and the ceiling. What they do is, I don't know if they do this on every flight, but on the NASA flights that I was on, the flight director would always yell, 40 low, feet down. And 40 low meant that the airplane was 40 degrees below horizontal. And so it was getting close to time to start pulling out again, 40 degrees. And so 40 low, feet down would mean get your feet under you because gravity's about to come back on again. And when gravity comes on, it comes on fast. You go boom. So you want to make sure your feet are down. They
Does it
recommend
hurt?
like, no,
Does it
no, no.
hurt?
I mean, it doesn't come, it's not like that hard, but
Okay.
gravity comes back pretty quickly. You don't have time to mess around. So if you're upside down and gravity comes on, you're going to fall down and hit your head. So when they yell 40 low coming out, get your feet down, get in position so that when gravity comes on, your feet land on the ground again. And they recommend lying on your back. And so I always lay on my back. They say that it's the high G, not the low G, that makes you sick. And that's because there's more of a Coriolis force. But after doing some high Gs, I was like, okay, I'm going to stand up on this high G. And so I got to where I could stand up, and they're like, the flight directors are looking at me like, what are you trying to do over there? But they didn't tell me not to, they just watched me the whole time. The thing about standing up in 2G is when you fall fast. You fall.
Yeah.
It's not just that you hit harder, it's that you fall so much faster that you can't get your hands out in time to catch yourself. So
I'm curious because I broke my femur in March and I've been told it shouldn't be an issue. Do you think I'll have any issues with that by the time October rolls around?
no,
No.
it'll be
Okay.
fine. It doesn't
Okay.
really stress your bones any. I mean, if you want to stand up in 2G, it will be stressing your legs a little bit more, but
So
you don't
maybe
have
no.
to stand up. Yeah,
Okay.
you can sit up or lie flat on your back.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Wow. This is crazy.
But do
Well,
this. If you have an object that you're using, like a show and tell or experiment or anything, in the 2G part, lift it up and drop it a few times and look at how fast it goes down. It's pretty cool.
okay. Okay, that's a good
Something
idea.
something to do in 2G.
Yeah, what should I bring? Well, we do have some more Mars questions, and I really like this one from Ross. Do we know the location, amount, and accessibility of subsurface ice on Mars yet to be able to reliably choose a good landing site for the first human mission?
I think so. So there's actually three or four different sources of water on Mars. One is actually the ice, which is at the northern latitudes. It's exposed at the surface in the polar regions. There's ice caps. But even down 70 degrees latitude, where Phoenix lander went, the ice was only a few centimeters under the surface. And equatorially, you would have to dig down a kilometer. You'd have to put in a deep well to get to that ice. But at higher latitudes, it's shallower. So it's pretty common on Mars, unless you go somewhere that's had a recent volcanic activity where the magma drove all the ice away. But the second source of ice, there are a couple of different kinds of minerals that contain water. There's phyllosilicates, those are like clays, and there's gypsum. And both of those have deposits on Mars, and you could dig those up and heat them and get the water out. And then the fourth source, besides phyllosilicates, gypsum, and ground ice, the fourth source is everywhere on Mars, the sand has water in it, everywhere. It's about 1%, or if you dig off the top couple centimeters, then it's about 2%. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's about the same as most of the ice on the moon. And on the moon, it's an ore body. It's on the moon, water is more valuable than gold, and the concentration of water in the soil is 50,000 times more than the concentration of gold in an ore body on the Earth. So even though it's only 1 or 2%, I mean, it is definitely an ore where it's worth getting it. So on Mars, everywhere on Mars, it's 1 or 2%. So water on Mars is globally available as an ore, meaning accessible in economically viable concentrations.
Good answer. Very thorough. And there was another kind of similar question from Mike. He wanted to know, do you prefer Mars surface or O'Neill-like habitats?
Okay, well, Personally, I'm more of an O'Neillian than a von Braunian.
Really?
So yeah, but I am an all of the above person, and I believe in letting the market sort it out. So I'm glad that Elon wants to do Mars and Jeff Bezos wants to do the moon and cislunar industry. So we have one billionaire doing both of the major programs. So we have a von Braunian, that's Elon. We have an O'Neillian, that's Jeff Bezos. So that's cool. That's what you want. You want to have diversity of approaches, and that way you end up trying everything and see what works. Um, but I'm glad people want to do Mars, um, because I do believe it's going to be part of the variety and the interest of human civilization when we're multiplanetary. I do believe there is going to be some benefit to making life more secure by having diversity of our habitats. Some people scoff at that, but there is some value to it, in my opinion. But also, I believe ultimately the big advances in civilization are going to be when we have a billion times Earth's industrial capacity by using asteroids. Because once you've got a billion times the ability to make stuff, then our civilization is going to be on fire with what we can do.
Yeah.
That's when we can start to send ships to other stars, and we can solve. I mean, it'll be post scarcity, right? So that's what I would like to see happen. But if people want to go settle on Mars, my opinion is those people are going to be customers for lunar resources because it'll make traveling back and forth to Mars cheaper. And so they all support each other. It's not either or, it's both and. Everything is synergistic. And the rising industry of activity in space is going to float all the boats.
Don't you wish though that we had a little bit more transparency with Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos and what's happening there?
So I was on their science advisory panel for a year. I stepped down in order to not have conflicts of interest, because I wanted to do work with other companies too.
Yeah.
But so I did have some insight that I wouldn't be allowed to talk about. So again, I have to be a little careful here. But yeah, I don't know what they've been doing since I've stepped down. I'll tell you this: they hired almost everybody I know. All the people in the space resources world, multiple graduates from my university have gotten jobs there. So all I know is they must be doing a lot of something because of all the people they've hired.
Yes.
They also purchased Honeybee Robotics. Honeybee Robotics was like the premier company in the world developing drills for other planets and doing lots of space resource contracts. I've had some contracts to Honeybee. I've worked with them both when I was at NASA and now at the university. They do top-notch work, and so Blue Origin bought them. So they must be doing something, and I'm looking forward to good things happening.
Yeah, it's funny. I was able to, for some reason, take a tour of Blue Origin. I've never taken a tour of SpaceX, and I like primarily cover SpaceX, but somehow was able to take a behind the scenes tour that I couldn't film, obviously, of Blue Origin. So,
Which
they're
location?
doing, they're in Florida.
Oh yeah, I've had that
Yeah.
tour too. It's pretty cool what they can do in that building.
So you went up the elevator and went, and saw like the overlook of the factory. Same tour.
I didn't go up. The last time I've been by
Okay.
there, it looks like they've greatly expanded that building. So you
Okay.
may have seen things that I didn't see.
Okay. Well,
What I had was a floor tour. We walked around through a lot of different rooms and saw what they could
see,
do there.
I wish I could have like drawn it or some, like um somehow reported on it. But yeah, maybe someday they'll make it public. Um,
Yeah.
but we're just not there yet. I do have, thank you, Ricker, and sorry it's taken long to get to the super chat. So thank you, first of all, for super chatting. And he wants to know, is a separate anti-chamber repressed chamber advisable in lunar lander plans to don off suits and isolate lunar dust living chambers? What are the hazards of crumbine, sharp particles on skin?
Okay. Yeah. So this is a dust mitigation question. So so Al, Jack Schmidt, who walked on the moon, um, he likes to say that we can solve the problem of dust by doing a multi-tiered engineering approach. I like to say it has to be a full court press from like basketball. You don't fight dust when they get down to the shooting lane. You know, you have to fight it all the way down the court. Um, but as Jack said, we can solve the problem with a multi-tiered approach. So so you want to have the ability to keep your spacesuits clean. You want to have the ability to keep the spacesuits out of your hab. You want to clean the air in your airlock, and you want to clean the air in the hab. You want to clean surfaces. Every step along the way, you need to be fighting the dust. Your rovers need to have dust mitigation to keep dust out of the sliding joints, you know, on the axles, and any other mechanisms. You want to keep from flipping the dust up with your wheels, you know. So every step along the way, you want to be fighting it. But I do share Jack's optimism that if we put in the time, do the engineering, we should be able to manage it. So I think the short answer to this question is yes, it's advisable to have an antechamber to deal with the dust. I've seen a number of different designs of this. One idea is you have a hatch on the back of your spacesuit, and you walk up to the habitat backwards, and you attach your back to it, and then the hatch on the back of your spacesuit opens automatically, and you climb out of your spacesuit backwards, and you leave the spacesuit outside. Then you close that hatch, seal it, and then you can go on into the rest of your habitat. So that's one approach. That way you leave the spacesuit outside, it never comes in. Pretty cool idea. Let's see. The other part of the question was about the sharp-edged particles. Honestly, I'll admit I don't know what crumbine means.
Yeah, I have not heard of that either. I thought you would know.
I'm assuming it has something to do with particle geology or physics or the health of particles in your body or something. But I can say in general, lunar soil is very sharp, jagged. These particles were formed by micrometeoroid bombardment and splatters of molten material solidifying to make little glass fragments. So the moon, in some places, the soil is up to 70% glass, little like crushed glass. And these little particles can be smaller than 10 microns, smaller than 1 micron. They can get all the way into the bottom of your lungs. So it is a real concern for human health. And we do need to be very serious about it to keep the dust out of the breathing air.
Yeah. We are getting some more lunar related questions. Mark wants to know, is there an advantage to a tank like track system over a mesh type wheel for driving on the lunar surface?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, the lunar rover had mesh type wheels, if I recall.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple of benefits. One is that it gives you some shock absorption. You know, on Earth, we typically have pneumatic tires, rubber filled with air. We don't want to use pneumatics on the moon because if you leak the air, you have to waste air refilling it. And also the temperature changes can cause the air pressure to go up or down too much.
Yeah.
So by having these mesh tires, you can have the same shock absorption without the air. Another benefit is the low mass. It's just less material, so you don't have to carry as much mass to the moon. There is a downside. The dust goes into those wheels, and as the wheels rotate, it's flinging the dust back out again. And so you can fling dust all over the rover. So in general, those kind of wheels are not good for dust mitigation, and a closed form would be better. So it's going to be a compromise, dust mitigation versus the mass of the material.
How long did you work at SwampWorks? You said you're not there currently, correct?
Yeah, I was with NASA for almost 30 years, and then I took
Wow.
early retirement to go to the university. But I was on the space shuttle for the first 10 years. I was on the space station for the next 7. And so after that, I think there's about 12 and a half years that I was in technology development. Um,
Wow.
for the first part of that, I was in a physics lab, and then we founded what we called the GMRO lab, the Granular Mechanics and Regolith Operations Lab. So Rob Mueller and I co-founded that. And then later on, we managed to get a big facility and some more money, like $1 million. And so we combined with several other labs and we rebranded it as the SwampWorks.
Mm.
So I don't know exactly how long I was in the GMRO or the SwampWorks, but it was maybe around 7 years in the GMRO overall.
Yeah. Wow. Um, and you said you're not really teaching classes right now because someone said earlier that your classes must be amazing, but you're more doing research, right?
Yep, I don't teach. I just do research. There's two kinds of faculty. There's teaching faculty and research faculty. So I'm research faculty.
Well, you're teaching us, if that counts.
I
Where
enjoy
where
it. I enjoy this much.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're in your class. Do you do a lot of podcasts or YouTube interviews?
No, I don't do a lot. I do a lot of speaking at conferences. Well, in 2020, when they were all virtual, I had like a conference every 2 weeks. It was crazy. But it's more back to a reasonable schedule now. But I do several
Right.
conferences per year. I do get asked to speak at events sometimes. I can't take all of them just because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if I have to
Well,
prepare a talk, like this is easy. This, answering questions, I didn't have to prepare ahead of time.
yeah. Good. I'm glad this is easy. Path Not Found says, fantastic show, Ellie. Enjoyed this way more than any other interview I've seen by other YouTubers. So I'm telling you, Dr. Phil, they love you.
Well,
You're
it's
really
fun
a great
talking about
guest.
space.
You're really a great guest, and people say they're learning a lot. So, is there anything else kind of current going on that I didn't touch on that you've been really interested in lately?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of missions going to the moon soon to study the ice. I'm supporting one of those missions. Um, it's a CLIPS mission that stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Services, and so NASA has a contract with several different companies. One of them is Astrobotic Technologies, and so they're going to fly a mission called Prime One, and Prime One is going to include a drill and a mass spectrometer to drill up some icy soil and then study the vapor that comes off to measure the ice. And what I'm working on right now is writing software that will convert the mass spectrometer readings into an estimate of how much ice is in that soil. So I'm writing the physics equations for ice sublimating and then diffusing through the soil and coming off to predict, based on the temperature of that drill cutting pile, um, to predict how much vapor comes off as a function of how much ice is in the soil, so that when we measure the vapor, we can say, oh, that means there's this much ice.
And I think one of the other companies working on that same CLIPS initiative is Firefly here out of Texas with the Blue Ghost
Yeah.
lander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, I think there's like about 7 or 8
Yep.
companies that were certified, and then they have to separately win a contract to actually carry a mission.
Well, here's another question. I think we touched on this a little bit last time, but how do you see AI assisting space exploration and colonization?
That's a great question. I think it's going to be very important for a couple of reasons. By the way, I loved the TV show The Expanse. But the first time I watched it, I kept thinking, where are all the robots? Because if you're going to be mining in space, you're probably going to have robotics doing most of that work. And
Yeah.
I tweeted that question, and then Joel Sercel, who
Yeah.
runs a space company, which is interested in mining asteroids and the moon, Joel said, "Yeah, that's right. Where are all the robots?" And he CC'd the Expanse writers. And so one of the writers of the book series of The Expanse replied, and he said, "Well, I will let you write the technically accurate but boring version."
Oh my gosh.
And I was like,
Wow.
good answer. That is the
That's
right answer. But
wow.
yeah, there will probably be a lot of robots doing a lot of the industrial work in space. And there's a technical reason for this. It's because here on planet Earth, our bodies are adapted to living in the context of the biosphere. And so we don't have to go out and convert minerals into food. The microbes have already converted the minerals into topsoil, and then the plants get the resources out of the topsoil and the atmosphere and the sunlight, and then other animals eat the plants, and then we live near the top of the food chain, right? And so if we want to leave planet Earth and we want to go somewhere where those processes are not already taking place, we're going to have to spend a lot of extra effort getting the resources out of the rock, and the water and the atmosphere, and converting it into everything. And so it puts us at a disadvantage when we leave planet Earth. But it's possible to overcome that disadvantage. Now, for example, if I wanted to go get carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester the carbon to undo some of the carbon we've released out into the atmosphere, you can do that, but it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of expense, and it'll really hurt the economy if we put too much effort into doing that. But trees can do it, and then we can go chop down the trees and use the carbon in the form of wood, and it doesn't cost anything for the trees to do it. So why does it cost so much for us to do it, but it costs nothing for the trees to do it? And the reason why is because trees are autonomous agents. They don't require much human labor to oversee them. And so they go off and they work autonomously. They do all that work, processing the resources, putting it into a form that we can then use economically. And so the key is to have autonomous agents doing a lot of that work. And so we can build robots that can mine the soil on Mars, mine the water, mine the atmosphere, and make anything. And as long as they're autonomous, then it can be free. Once we've established this industry and put in enough effort to get it self-replicating to some degree, to make enough of itself, so we can have humans there working on it. We just don't need to have humans doing everything. Oh, by the way,
Right.
let me give you one other example. I did this exercise once. If you assume that the hardest a human can work is 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, is the level of an agricultural worker. That's pretty hard work. That's about a tenth of a horsepower. So if you multiply a tenth of horsepower by the number of hours in a work year, it comes out to a certain amount of energy that humans can do per year. The amount of energy that we have in our economy from machines is literally 1,500 times that amount. So we've already leveraged ourselves 1,500 times here on planet Earth using machines. But you can't leverage yourself 1,000,000 times, because that would mean we need 1,000 times more machines on the Earth, and that's going to hurt the Earth. But once we go off the Earth into space, we can do 1,000 times more leveraging, or 1,000,000 times, or 1,000,000,000 times. And we can put more machinery on Mars to do these tasks and to get the planet stood up and going. So I think AI to run all of these machines is going to be really important.
Oh yeah.
It's going to carry some of the load so that it'll allow the humans on Mars to enjoy their life a lot more, to be human, to have time to make music and paint and write stories and look at the sunset and do things that humans do.
Yes. How much research have you done on the in situ resource utilization with Mars?
Not as much as the moon. See, when I was with NASA in the early part of my period in that group doing in situ resource utilization, we were originally focused on Mars. And so I was originally studying Mars resources, studying how to land rockets on Mars. But then during the Constellation program, they started studying how much it would cost for NASA to do Mars missions. And they quickly decided, let's just focus on the moon for a while because we really can't afford to do Mars. And so that was, we'd talk all the time. It's moon to Mars. It's journey to Mars. Focus on the
Yeah.
journey. We might not get there for a while, but it's a journey. So, I think that's the truth. I think that NASA really doesn't get enough budget to do Mars missions the way that NASA does missions. But the way that Elon does missions, yes, now you can do Mars missions. Elon does things like blow up his launch pad because he took a risk and learned a lot. I think that's great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So he blew a little sand in the air. So what? But he got his test off, right? And so Elon can do things like that, which NASA cannot do. So I'm glad there's a NASA. I'm glad there's an Elon. I'm glad there's a Jeff, right? And I think they've all got their roles. But boy, I've rambled, and I forgot what the question was. It was about Mars resources. So yeah, so we got focused at NASA on the moon. NASA is still focusing on the moon. We talk a lot about Mars. Honestly, I think that Elon's going to develop the infrastructure to get to Mars first, and NASA will get on board with it. So I think we're going to get to Mars sooner. But in my career, I've mostly focused on the moon for resources.
Well, even with the focus on the moon, it just blows my mind that it's been so long and we still haven't been back. I mean, I know we're working on it, but it's kind of crazy. Seems long overdue, correct?
Yeah, it is crazy. It is nobody involved in the program thought that it would be another 50 years and we still haven't put anybody on the moon.
Yeah.
Everybody I know says it's a travesty that this happened. What happened was they canceled everything because the American public wasn't really all that enthusiastic about it at the time. There was the
Why?
Vietnam. Well, it was the Vietnam War, and why are we
Yeah.
spending money in space instead of spending it on the Earth? It's kind of a dumb
There's still
argument,
that
but
argument. There's still that
yeah,
argument, though.
and it doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense really.
Yeah.
The amount of money we spend on binge drinking, not even social drinking, just binge drinking, is like 12 times what we spend on NASA. The amount of money we spend on fast food, not even the fast food we eat, but the fast food that gets thrown away, is like multiple times what we spend on NASA. And yet, what we spend on the space program pays back huge dividends in every area of technology, healthcare, and direct benefit to the planet, because we're monitoring the Earth, we're learning how the Earth works, we're learning about the Earth, Moon, solar system environment. The Earth is, that's going to sound kind of funny, but the Earth does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a solar system, which includes the solar wind and the radiation and the small bodies, the asteroids, meteors, and all these things are part of the Earth system. They interact with the Earth in ways that affect what happens on the surface. And so we're learning about that. And I think we need to learn about our planet. And the part of the way we do that is by going to Mars. If you were a medical doctor and you were going to go cut somebody to do surgery, and they asked you, have you studied the human body before? And you said, well, I studied one. They might feel a little bit uneasy about that surgery that's about to happen. But we've studied a lot of human bodies.
Yeah.
So far we've really only studied one planet. And we don't really know a lot of these things that happen on planets. So we need to study more planets. We need to get there. We need to put scientists on the surface of that planet to unravel the geology and the geological history and the history of our solar system to figure out how planetary systems behave. So, yeah, so this idea like, oh, we shouldn't be spending money in space, kind of a dumb argument.
Yes, yes. Even the lady yesterday, I got these balloons behind me to celebrate hitting over 70,000 subscribers on YouTube. So thank you guys for that. But she was like, "So what's your channel about?" And I'm like, "Oh, I cover space related news." And she's like, "Oh, wow, these mylar balloons, that's something that happened because of space exploration." And so
That's
she
cool.
she was on board with it. She was on board with all of the benefits that we've had just from going to space and inventions and stuff that we've discovered along the way. So that was nice to
That's
see.
awesome. That's awesome.
Here's someone read your paper, it sounds like. Artie Hat says, in your lunar landing pad paper, you talk about rovers that would help build the pads. What would they look like and how would they get to the moon?
Okay. I've seen a lot of prototype rovers because we have this competition, the NASA robotic mining competition. And every year we get 40 or 50 robots delivered to NASA to do the competition. And in my opinion, the ones that seem to work best are four-wheeled, not six wheels like on Mars, but four wheels, pretty big wheels, so they don't get stuck in the soil, have a lot of torque, and just blue collar, hard working robots, just able to power through the dirt. Nothing's fancy about it. Just four wheels, a lot of torque on the motors, a lot of gear ratio, and big motors, and go at it, and that works. So how would they get there to the moon? Well, they would go on a lander. If it's a small lander, you could have a ramp and they would drive down. On Starship, they have these concept pictures where they show an elevator lowering things to the surface. So there's different ways to offload your lander, but they would have to take a ride, something like that. Now, one concept that NASA has looked at is having different attachments on your rover. So you can have a bulldozer attachment, you can have a bucket excavation attachment, you can have 3D printing attachments, you can have sintering attachments. So the way I'm imagining it is you will have all these attachments, your rover will drive up, hook up to the bulldozer blade, and then it'll go bulldoze and flatten the area. Then it'll attach the compacting device and it'll drive over the soil and vibrate it and compact it down. Then it'll leave that. Then it'll go pick up the sintering device. And the sintering device is microwaves. And it'll drive back and forth and just microwave the soil to slightly melt it to a good thickness, like maybe about a foot thick. So that's what I'm imagining would be one of the best ways to do it. But there are a lot of other concepts. Some people want to spread polymer on the ground to glue it down. That doesn't take very much energy and it's super fast. You could build a landing pad in a few hours, but
Wow.
it does take like 10 tons of polymer that you have to bring from the Earth. So there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Well, Grace says, the engineering is so genius, so relevant. It will be worth it. Even if we don't get to Mars, never give up, which I think we can both agree. I'm curious, do you think that Starship is our best hope of getting to Mars?
Well, so far, definitely, because it's big and it has a lot of space inside. So for a 6-month journey, I would rather be inside of a big space than a small one, right? I can't imagine a capsule the size of Orion going to Mars for, being cooped up in that little thing for 6 months. But So Starship was designed to be a Mars vehicle, and therefore it's a lot bigger. Maybe in the future we will design a spacecraft that will produce artificial gravity, and so you'll have a counterweight and a cable, and just start it spinning. That way, you will have a, a little bit less harmful effects on your body during the trip. You know, you'll have the reduced gravity to keep your bones healthy, and any other effects of reduced gravity. I don't think we really know yet enough about human health in low gravity, but anyways, that's something that we could do. So another idea is to have a cycler vehicle. In the Martian, they had cyclers. And so what they do is they go around Mars, they whip around, they come back to Earth, they whip around the Earth, they go back to Mars. They just never stop. And every time you pass the planet, you do a burn in order to get it re-aimed for the next planet. And so cyclers are a really great idea, because once you get them up to speed, you don't have to keep speeding them up and slowing them down again. And you can make them very big. So I think in the future, there will one day be cyclers that can have a lot of radiation shielding on them. Once you get all that radiation shielding up to speed, then it's okay. You don't have to keep speeding it up and slowing it down every time. So you can have a lot of radiation shielding on the spacecraft.
Well, we do have an update. Thanks, Randy, for letting us know that the subscriber space for Elon will be 6 p.m. Central Time. So in about an hour here, hour 15. So we'll take maybe one or two more questions, and then if that's all right with you.
Sure.
I appreciate you giving us so much time. This is incredibly nice of you. Mark wants to know, and there was another question about nuclear earlier in the chat, but years ago we heard about the promise of helium-3 as a nuclear reactor power source. Is this still a viable option for a power source?
It is, yeah. So Jack Schmitt, who walked on the moon, is one of the main proponents of this idea. I have never personally tried to push the idea, just because there were skeptics. You know, the joke is we've been 40 years away from having fusion for the last 40 years.
Yes.
It's a joke, but it's so true.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I've never tried to push the helium-3 story. But in the last couple of years, there have been breakthroughs in fusion. And there are very serious technologists that I know and respect that are starting to say we are actually getting close to having it. And when we do get it, it will be revolutionary. It will revolutionize energy here on the Earth. It'll be clean energy. And so this could happen not too far in the future. Now, why would you need helium-3? Because you can just use hydrogen from the ocean in one of these reactors. Well, I'm not an expert on this, but if I recall, the benefit of helium-3, one of the benefits is it does not make any radioactive products. And it's also easier to use as a fuel. You don't need as much temperature and pressure to use it. So helium-3 is a preferred fuel if you can get fusion working. So if we get fusion going, there probably will be a market for helium that you've obtained on the moon. I have seen studies that have looked into this. I'm trying to think. There was something else I was going to say. I'll say this. I was actually involved in one of these studies recently, but we can't talk about the results of the study. But just, a lot of, companies do studies and, it's all business. So you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
You don't want your competitors to know what you're doing.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. Not just fusion. There are other market uses for helium. Helium on Earth is mainly produced by radioactive decay in the crust of the Earth, and it collects underground. And we've tapped into a lot of this, and we've got strategic reserves of it, but we've been using it up for party balloons. I mean, you got some right behind you there, I see, on those balloons
No.
probably.
Don't call me out. Yeah, no. That's actually, so this is $81 worth of balloons because she
Wow.
said the price went up because of helium.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But hey, the people that run these strategic reserves, they need to make an income too, right? Or else we wouldn't have them. So they got to
mhm.
sell something.
Right,
But
right.
so there's some cope for you. But the but yeah, the thing is, we use helium for medical uses and other things. So there are people who argue that we could get helium off the moon commercially and use it even if we don't have fusion. Now, I have not personally done these studies, but I don't know. Once we start flying to and from the moon regularly, and once is a lot of economic activity happening in space, then a lot of these other things will become economic as marginal business opportunities, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's very plausible.
Well, I appreciate you coming back on the channel so quickly. We've enjoyed this discussion. I think everyone here has really enjoyed it, and I'm just curious, when you said that you have partial results from your Starship collection analysis. So when do you expect to get maybe more results where we could follow up with you?
I'm going to talk to the grad student tomorrow. He usually comes in on Fridays, and see if we can wrap it up. He's already done his measurements. He just needed to write something, and so I'm going to see on Friday if we can ship everything to the researcher at Rice University, and then if the Rice researcher can get it done pretty quickly, I'm thinking maybe in a couple of weeks,
Okay.
should be able to have the paper written, the rough draft. So yeah, we should be able to button it up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I know that I would love to hear your follow-up on that. And then in about an hour here we'll be hearing from Elon, and we could see another launch in 6 to 8 weeks. At least that's the timeline he gave a couple days ago, but I'm wondering if, any of the pending lawsuit might affect that. So I guess we'll hear. I don't even know if he would address that in an hour here, but
Mhm.
would you go to the launch? I know you didn't see the first one.
Um, I would love to. I just don't have any travel plans right now, but I'd
Yeah.
consider it for sure.
Yeah. I I mean, I think you should. I think it's well worth it if you can make time and if you can make it over there. It was pretty epic. And that goes
Yeah.
for everyone here. If
When I
if
was
you
a
were able to see
kid,
it.
when I was
Yeah.
a kid, I actually got to see the Apollo launches to the moon because I grew up in Titusville. Oh, by the way, did I mention this last time? I'm on a Netflix show where I talked about those Apollo launches. It's
No.
called it's called Alien Worlds. So go to episode 4, scroll halfway through, and there's like a 10 or 15-minute segment where I'm talking about stuff. Um,
Really?
but they interviewed me and asked me about the Apollo launches, and they took me down to the shore where you could see NASA across the river, and it was at sunset, and the lighting was pretty cool. I thought they did a pretty good job of it.
Wow. That is, yeah, you did not mention that. That's really cool. What did they want to ask you about in specific?
Um, well, the series was about aliens in space and are they visiting us or not, and why not? And so episode 4 was all about industry, robots in space. Um, and if there's aliens out there, why have they not sent robots everywhere by now? Why are the robots not already here? Maybe they are. Like I said before, if there's any civilizations within, I don't know, maybe even 1,000 light years, I would expect they're monitoring us. So, maybe not that close, maybe at a distance, but that's what the episode was about.
Hmm.
Robots building robots. They actually filmed in the Swamp Works, in the regolith bin. They showed a wheel that was 3D printed out of lunar regolith, simulated lunar regolith. So it's actually a regolith wheel. That was kind of cool.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to take a tour of Swamp Works sometime if it's possible. Do you know if they're pretty friendly with media tours still, or is it kind of hard?
Um, They used to have a lot more tours than they do now. Like when I was there, the NASA socialists would open this one works. And so maybe like once a week we would have tours coming through, but I think they reduced the number of tours. However, they probably do allow media to come.
Okay.
So you'd have to make a pitch where you're going to talk about the size of your audience and everything to convince them. You'd have to contact public affairs at the Kennedy Space Center to give your pitch.
Well, good thing I can say, hey guys, I have over 70,000 subscribers on YouTube.
That's big.
I'm not some joke over here. Take me seriously. Have you been on Lex Fridman?
I don't think so.
Why do I think that you should be? You so should be. I feel like everyone here will agree. Have you heard his podcast? He's like,
no.
Okay, well, I'm gonna nominate you. Okay. But anyway, well, thank you so much for chatting with us and giving us your time. I look forward to following up with you, in a few weeks. And just thanks for hanging out. And I'm glad this was easy for you, not stressful.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, it's super easy and I'm glad to do it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out, and I'm going to get ready for the Elon chat. Awesome.